Hello, my name is Jacek Bartosiak. Welcome to Strategy and Future. And today my guest is Everett Dolman. Hello, Everett.
Hello, how are you, Jacek?
Yeah, I'm fine. How are you?
Very good.
Everett, as you know, is the world's probably even most famous space strategist, at least to my knowledge, and one of my most favorite interlocutors, if I may put it that way. And it would be my great pleasure today to talk about space strategies. We haven't talked almost in a year. Many things have happened, including, and let me brag a little bit, including me finishing, along with George Friedman, of course, a book about space warfare and space economy and its influence on terrestrial geopolitics. So I'm loaded, I'm ready, and I was waiting impatiently for the possibility to talk to you, Everett. So let's get started. Uh, Let me just ask the following question at the beginning. So, what do you think happened within those 11 months since we talked last time that is the most important from the perspective of space strategy, space exploration, space warfare potential, space force? What would you say? How would you react to my question?
Well, yeah. Well, thank you for the kind words too. I always enjoy these discussions and talks that we have. Um, there have been some interesting changes in more at the tactical level in space. I think with what's being deployed. Of course, you just simply cannot ignore the amazing advances that Blue Origin and SpaceX have put on those launches, putting people into space, civilians into space. The total part of the economy that comes from that space tourism is just a tiny percentage of the total value of the economy from outer space, as you know. But I think it really helps to heighten public awareness of the reality of how close we are to really being a space-faring peoples. And those developments in rocketry and reusable rocketry are very promising for getting routine access to space. There are a few environmental concerns, and of course, there's some interesting new launch facilities that are not necessarily where we would have placed them at the most advantageous, and a lot of that is through political allowances for smaller downrange necessities, etc. But the big changes from the warfighting perspective that I tend to look at that have gone in the last year are continuing breakthroughs in directed energy capabilities, interesting realliances between the Russians and the Chinese, and partnerships in space exploration, announced partnerships that have not necessarily taken a lot of steps yet. But now, from the old days when the Chinese were sort of getting space technology from the Russians, it's going the other way as well. And joint partnerships for the moon and other development areas. The Indians also are continuing to move apace with their development. And those are very interesting. And the basing positions that the Chinese are putting on the moon, and maybe we'll talk about that a little bit, are curious and fascinating and profound. And then the technologies are starting to break through. We're seeing some breakthroughs in electrical propulsion systems that are allowing us to think in different terms than we have with the tyranny of gravity and orbital mechanics. Breakthroughs in nuclear propulsion, at least at the theoretical level, that could make some tremendous changes, and rapid advancements in directed energy, and that's something that's fascinating.
Yeah, let's maybe go step by step in order to shed some bigger picture. I noticed within the 10 last months that the Chinese established a celestial line of communication to the moon, brought the sort of soil samples back from the moon, demonstrating the capability to sustain the communication line, supply line to the moon, being interested in the lunar station, entered some talks with the Russians to establish their joint lunar station. I also noticed in the specifications of the U.S. Space Force tenders and orders that the cislunar itself, the huge area within the gravity of the Earth between Moon and Earth and a little bit beyond, has become also a subject of interest of the U.S. Space Force. There are some tenders for sensors, satellites, space vehicles to do something in this huge area. It seems fascinating, apart from this official side that we have, the Starship launched to be launched very soon. We have all those new capabilities. You mentioned lasers now, which is something of great interest. It seems that it launched. I mean, the space race and this sort of a space competition launched between US and China, and this geostrategic situation on Earth is sort of opening the new domain, space domain, as a new high ground. What do you think? What would be the main breakthroughs that would demonstrate the advancement in this competition, or the next step in this competition, and maybe technological breakthroughs? So how would you react to this sort of issue?
Well, there's as far as space travel goes, and like I said, the human sort of tourism idea is more propaganda than actual value, in that it's just very expensive to keep people alive in space, at least in orbit in space. And but it does just pique the imagination, and it brings the public closer to looking at the reality of where we're going. And it has great value in its own self, but also has great value in the concept of warfighting, and bringing the classic warfighting, anti-war, war strategy, debates back into focus for outer space, because people are there. But most of it will be robotic. Most of it will be for the next 15 to 20 years at the very least, controlled from remotely. It's because we have miniaturization, because it's cheaper to get stuff in that can do things, until we start actually manufacturing in space. And that may be very, very close. We're already building things in space with 3D printers. And so it's a matter not of taking materials up, except for maybe the printing, the ink cartridge, basically the print cartridge for a 3D printer, to start printing some amazing things and building some tremendous things. The technology that will change everything is a propulsion technology that allows constant propulsion of spacecraft. And whether that be a new kind of nuclear propulsion system, tremendous advantages in electro propulsion systems.
You mean nuclear fusion, some sort of a nuclear fusion, or traditional fission?
It's something like that. Nuclear generation of power, probably for electric propulsion, might be more sustainable, to give the electric propulsion capabilities a greater speed, because right now they're fairly slow, but you can have constant propulsion with electrical propulsion systems, because you can continue to keep them going as long as you have a power source. And so, as it is with most fuel-based or liquid fuel or solid fuel that we have, the rockets really only ignite for a short period of time, just enough to get into an orbit, and then very short bursts to get from one orbit to another. But if you can use constant propulsion, and we're talking about the vast distances beyond cislunar, beyond the moon's orbit, you're going slowly, maybe a half a gravitational delta V, as it's called, change in velocity, but that's constant, and it keeps multiplying. And so for any concept of moving out of the solar system and moving on, or getting to the outer planets and the outer moons of the great giants, it makes very good economic sense to be thinking of a 3 or 4 year transition, starting out slowly and building steam, if you will, as you go along, and especially as you go to other stars. In the meantime, though, in the Earth, because we are so tied to orbital mechanics for what will happen on the Earth, and it's where we live, and it's where wars will have their greatest impact. We have to think about operating in massive networks with constant view of the entire planet, or a capability, at least in the small term, and whether that's refueling, which seems to be a little bit problematic right now, or some new technology that can just allow us to actually place a spacecraft above a certain place on the Earth and with constant propulsion keep it there. Right now, the only place we can really do that is above the equator in the geostationary belt. But we are getting, because of networks like Starlink, which will have constant capability to communicate over the entire globe because of thousands of satellites, small satellites, interlinked through laser communications, we'll have complete and permanent presence over every place on the Earth. And that's going to change a lot of things. It's going to give us the situational awareness we need to have really refined capabilities in economics, but also in military systems to detect and see movement, detect change over time. But the technologies that will be most transformational in the near time, I think, are propulsion technologies and directed energy advancements. Now, I know you have several views of different technologies that will be transformational that aren't in space, which I find absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, thanks. In the book with George Friedman, we described 3 breakthroughs that will need to happen to really talk about the space domain as a separate, independent domain that is imposing on the traditional domains, terrestrial domains of sea, land, and air. And the first breakthrough will be, theoretically about terrestrial capability being hypersonic, real cruise hypersonic, not glide hypersonic, but really cruise hypersonic, with hypersonic speeds, missiles moving within the atmosphere that cannot be properly detected and tracked long enough to be interdicted by the terrestrial capabilities. You need to put the sensors detection and maybe the new version of the Reagan lasers, brilliant pebbles and brilliant eyes in space in order to and if you have this hypersonic global reach cruise capability, then you can influence both tactical and strategic situations from everywhere on Earth. And that means that you need to go for the offensive, you need to go for the sensors, so you need to go for war in space. And that means attacking the satellites, especially in low Earth, but not only low Earth orbits. And then you need to defend them. Okay, so you need to defend them by maneuverability, by sensors, by lasers, and other things. So that will move the war into space. And the second thing is if we really have a full-fledged, genuine space plane with a specific impulse long enough to really sustain operations and move back and forth from air, to change domains from air to space, in space using speeds, cosmic speeds, space speeds, but without maneuverability and unpredictability that air provides, right? But if you have sort of a mixture, a hybrid, but real space plane, then you change the everything. You are really a king, a Caesar, an imperator of those new domains. And the third would be moving the humans to the battle stations somewhere in geostationary Lagrange points, where you would be commanding the battlefield. Because if you have a lag, and this is like 1.2 right second within this lunar, with all the systems and nodes, it can take up even a few seconds, and you need a man up there, because otherwise your launching facilities, your command centers on Earth could be destroyed by terrestrial capabilities. So this is the frame where we think we need to move. Plus, of course, you need to have the sustained economy resources. So we need to make money in space. That's why I fully agree with you. At least this is what I judge from what you have been writing. That this idea that space is a commonwealth of the humanity, and we need to share somehow idealistically, will not stand, will not hold, because of the human nature and the race for resources, for dominant positions, strategic locations, minerals. It's already there. It's happening right now between the Artemis program, Artemis Accord frame, and the Chinese program, and that will drive the military competition, and it will go alongside. So, four drivers of economy: new transportation, meaning new propulsion system, which is cheap and common. The new production system like 3D printers, microgravity production, new energy sources, be it solar directly from space and beamed microwaves to Earth, and of course helium, other things on Moon and other celestial bodies, and of course the information, dissemination of information. And space is a perfect reservoir and medium as well to transmit data, and already it's happening. The economy is there about information, and because we live in the information driven era, a new oil of economy. So those four factors will drive the need to sustain the cavalry that will be protecting the new economy. So roughly speaking, in a very brief description, although it has taken maybe too many minutes, this is the glimpse of our idea, how you need to sort of talk about it. That's how we view the next 50 years. If, of course, people like Elon Musk and other new space guys will, keep pushing.
Well, history is certainly a guide if you understand how to get the lessons out of it and see the patterns over time, which is what you're doing. It's pretty obvious. And of course, my fascination with geopolitics being extended into astro politics is an attempt to do that. I like that you mentioned the cavalry, because the experience in opening up sort of new domains, wherever they might be, whether they be in Siberia, whether they be in the American West, whether they be in Africa or the Brazilian rainforest. People venture in usually on their own, trying to find wealth and riches, and when they find them, when they establish them, whether it be beaver pelts in the American West, it's the cavalry and it comes in, or the military that comes in, not because of a warfighting need necessarily, but as a protection of a commerce need. And I can see that happening very, very quickly with the growth in commerce and the growth in value. And that's what it takes, is growth in value of an area, resource extraction usually on the earth. But we have to start thinking in information terms much more so. I think I'm very much in agreement with your assessment of the likelihood and of warfighting and the need to understand it and get ahead of it. I'm working for the U.S. Space Force at times, and the Air Force at other times, and the insistence that space is a warfighting domain is not because we want it to be a warfighting domain, but that we want to understand the importance of it and how to organize to be prepared to be a protector of commerce. Because already, in fact, 5 years ago, I think at least, for the United States, we have a massive aviation industry. But the space industry in the United States has already outstripped in net profit and net expenditures that of the aviation industry. And we see that every day, and we don't see space. We don't see space on Earth, and that's changing, getting to the importance of it. I'm really fascinated by the way you and George Friedman are thinking about how technologies on the Earth, for example, the hypersonics, accentuate the need for, or the inevitability, I guess is a better term, of war fighting in space and how important space becomes to the entire notion. We've moved to ideas everywhere of the joint war fighting or all domain war fighting. And it's usually those sort of developments in one domain, the air domain or the land domain, the sea domain, that change everything in how we think about another parallel domain and how that operates. And I'm really fascinated by that. I'm going to have to look at that. The command station too is really interesting. I've been arguing that once we get out to, say, Mars or the asteroid belts, obviously we'll have to have human beings on the scene to make decisions, or we're going to develop extremely good AI, and there's problems with decision-making AI that we can imagine as well. The lag time, and you hear it from the old communications to the Apollo moon missions and the returns. It's it's even annoying when you watch the news and someone's on the other side of the earth and a question comes and there's this noticeable delay. At the speed of information and the speed of directed energy and the types of movement that we're talking about, where do we, how far can we go with that kind of a delay in situational awareness, and having the command centers, and I'm thinking really at the Lagrange points, and to move the defenses out a little farther, move the defenses between the moon and the earth, and then even just the communications reliability of going through a vacuum versus the atmosphere, or what could be a very, very difficult atmosphere in certain kinds of war. And of course, I'm thinking of nuclear war, but even wars less than that with chemicals and other things that might be happening in the future could really be obviated by having those command centers for defense in space, even with the reasonable lag times, because you have to balance the cost of keeping humans in space versus the cost of being completely robotic and remotely operated. And you do that based on a lot of other decisions, economics, and of course the really awful but true notion that human beings in space make it harder to go for decisions to go to space because they're high profile. We know they're up there. The satellite goes dark, and well, are we really going to make a big deal out of it? But a human being gets killed in space, and the whole world knows about it, and it becomes problematic for those who might start issues there.
True. There are a lot of traditional strategic questions pertaining to space. You mentioned killing a human, but what if not killing a human, but by just disrupting satellites? What is strategic stability? Where is the threshold of war? Because you want to keep the world away from the war in terrestrial battlefields. So how deterrence works, deterrence by denial, deterrence by punishment in this new great power competition that goes to space. Is a space Pearl Harbor, feasible idea? How to defend, how to demonstrate and signal capabilities. And then finally, how space is different from sea. What's the correlation between the continent, the land in the space, as opposed to land and the sea? At the end of the day, even Mongolia is a neighbor to the space, and it's not a neighbor to the sea. And it's only a thin layer of gas that is separating Mongolia from space, and technology is the only gap that needs to be fulfilled. So similarities between domains, but at the same time, slight differences that translate into huge strategic outcomes. That is fascinating in my opinion. Or, for example, we in the book we have been pondering hard how to transform the Mackinder's thesis about what is the pivotal place, this heartland and so on. You're very familiar with this idea. Basically, we loaned a lot from your thesis in this book, and we quote you. We think that if you control the world ocean, the lanes of communication of the world ocean. And if you control space, you don't need to have the forward presence in Eurasia anymore. You don't need to have the remnant of Eurasia under control, because you control most important strategic flows on Earth and in space. And that makes for the most profitable and most voluminous flows that you can have in modern economy. So you're in charge. And that, for example, that gives United States the room for maneuvering in this current great power competition in Eurasia. That, you know, you still can withdraw to the world ocean, rely on Five Eyes or even Six Eyes if you know, expand by Japan. And if you control space, not even make it a sanctuary, but you control space in terms that you can impose your will through space, then you don't need to be heavily involved in Eurasian affairs, because you control most important strategic flows anyway, and all strategic flows of the future. And that's how space is transforming. On the other hand, you know, we were heavily analyzing Castex, this French strategist, and Gorshkov, the Soviet admiral, that if you want to oppose space from the continental perspective, and you want to deprive the status of sanctuary, you need to adopt more of the maritime continental perspective, not Mahan, but more of Castex, yes, not Corbett, but Gorshkov. You know, sort of because, you know, it's not far away. It's close. And if you have anti-satellite, both soft kill and hard kill capabilities, I think that even assets in the low Earth orbits already in senility are potentially challenged, threatened, even obsolete. You need, you know, you need to think about expanding optics to geostationary and control from there, and so on. And you go further, higher, you know, higher commanding position, and so on and so forth, up to the moon. I could talk for hours about it. It's fascinating. I just this interplay between domains, traditional domains and the new domain, is fascinating. How you can exploit it. For example, for the U.S. to keep on its role of the security stabilizer on Earth. Yeah.
You know, the reasoning by analogy that we do, especially as we enter into a new domain, we entered it with the era. I imagine it was done in the ancient times when the first warships were built, and why that was meant. The railroad is too another domain. The automobile, missiles became another domain in the way of thinking. How do we think about this with this metaphor? And we need to do that. I mean, we're human beings. We think in analogies. We think in metaphors. And so we look at what would space look like if we used a model that was from the sea instead of from the air. And when you apply that thinking to a domain, you get you get patterns that come up. Now, the more you think about it and the longer you think about it, you find that it starts to fall apart, and it always will, because they're not completely parallel. And you start then making domain specific sort of ideas about where this is that seem to be unique to that domain. And then as time goes on, you find another analogy or something. The idea for my employer is based more like the sea than the air, or more like the air than the sea. And a lot of that comes to long durations of missions. You know, the air power goes up, it comes down. We're talking about space bases, but air power is nothing without land base, air bases on the ground. There's a tremendous parallel way of thinking in that is fruitful. But what we have to be careful is not get into the trap that thinking is precise. It is the same, that it really is. When we talk about geopolitics and the great geopoliticians, and Mahan and Mackinder and Least and others, as we go through time, and we look at these parallels and how certain lessons repeat themselves. I know many of my critics look at geopolitics, and what they see is, when I'm trying to talk about geostrategy and you're talking about geostrategy, how do you take advantage of places not only to make war but to prevent war or to deter war? Often the criticism says, yes, but all of these have led at some point to geodeterminism, which becomes the basis for fascism, for hypernationalism, for a belief that some group or people is endowed by nature with some advantages. And of course, this was geopolitic from the Nazi regimes of the 1930s and 40s. But it doesn't have to be if we keep aware of it, if we keep the knowledge that this is where it can be perverted and corrupted. So when I go to speculations about how the United States, for example, might take advantage of these positions, I'm also saying, well, how might China do it? Or how might Russia do it? Or how might, and as yet unknown, or the next great superpower do it? And how do we then forestall that? It comes from both sides. It gets at both. The Rimland idea, which comes from Mackinder and is just so fascinating because it was an important component of international policy. And you saw Spickman do it with a geopolitical policy for peace. How do we understand these choke points, these communication lines, these pathways and patterns, so that we can prevent not make it? Now, it's a valuable exercise, I think, and thinking about space as, where is the heartland of space? Where is the rimland? Where is the outer crescent? Where are these areas of decision that have been put in, and where are the really critical points? And the fascinating thing for me was Mackinder's identification at a time of early of advanced railroad, but it's still early automobile and aircraft development, was that Eastern Europe is the key to keeping the world from entering into another world war. If you can prevent either the Central Asian great state, which was Russia, or a European great state, which could be France or Germany, from controlling Eastern Europe, if you could prevent that, then you could probably prevent one state from taking so much of a resource base that it could eventually and ultimately dominate the entire Earth. Is there a parallel in space? Will space industry, will space solar power collection, and I mean, if we could collect solar power from space and transmit it to the United States, making oil go away, would that state, would that country be the new Middle East power brokers? If we could produce in space industry, if we could use routine space like is being developed with the space barons, the economic space barons, could we get toxic and radioactive waste off of this planet? And do all of those things create the possibility for a new green future, a future with no carbon emissions because of solar power, no industrial slag or waste because of industry out in space, and then cleaning up problems that we already have? Or all of these technologies could be used in a war-making capability. And so it's not the technologies that are difficult here, it's what we do with them and how we think about them. And deterrence, if we get some time, maybe, I'm working on sort of a domain theory. Why is it that we even think of warfighting domains as separate areas? And the importance is really for organization and control and proper understanding of what works. I've come to the conclusion that the only way to deter an attack on space that could create a global war, that could be the spark of a global war, is to be able to defend space assets in space, not to space. There's too many ways of thinking you can get around, you can get away with an attack on space if if your opponent is relying on a terrestrial response from an attack on space.
Yeah, that's true. That's critically important to really properly strategize those responses in space in order to control the escalation ladder on both sides of the equation. And that brings the huge subject that has been with humanity since its origins, actually, about balance of power and stability. And you mentioned geopolitics, great names and those theories, but and control of pivotal points. I think that this is about balance, and usually balance is about preserving peace, even if this peace, smells, tastes bad, because it's not fair or just, but at least it preserves peace. And so there have been so many cases in the history of humanity once this balance is broken because of not understanding and strategizing that there are places that are, providing better yields or better positions. Then this, the whole edifice is broken, and we have instability with many wars. Take a look at the greater Middle East now. It unraveled. Its building is broken, and there is no equilibrium now in place. The same was in Europe in the 20th century, actually. Once the balance was broken, it took a century to sort of balance it out. And I think that's why the U.S. Space Force was established in advance, a priori, to create the situation where there is this constructivist framework where the United States Force is the navy of the space, the dominant navy, and imposes. Because in space, you can have three options in the future: anarchy, as it was in the world system over centuries, concert of powers with feudal divisions of labors and responsibilities, and that will be always tested, or hegemonic situation. And however it sounds, hegemonic situation is the most peaceful if the hegemony is not contested. And of course, everybody is agreeing to 10 commandments, sort of 10 commandments that hegemon is providing. And traditionally, the United States has been thinking that it provides a very benevolent hegemony in terms of trade, commerce, using the world ocean, right? And Bretton Woods system. So, putting philosophical questions aside and issues, I think that, I have no idea what the future will bring. I'm quite confident, though, that the Chinese will not accept it, and they will be, first of all, testing space as a sanctuary. And United States military has gotten accustomed to operating with impunity from the sanctuary, and those times are over. Yeah. And those multipliers of capabilities through space will be contested. And second, that you need to devise the plan how to really be always a step ahead, because the Chinese, that's my personal opinion, are moving to the moon just to outflank from both sides, just like Hannibal did in the battle of Cannes in the ancient times, double envelope, both from the terrestrial domain against the U.S. dominance in low Earth and medium Earth orbit, GPS and stuff, and also from the moon system. Just like the Portuguese did to the Arabs in the 15th and 16th century. They couldn't go through the Levant to get to the riches of the India and China, so they sailed around. Or, as Columbus did, he wanted to get straight but around, so to speak, not around Africa. That was the motivation, right? And I really have a hunch that the Chinese are moving to moon to make the similar move to the new world, to this new continent of vast resources and the great capabilities to move further to the asteroid belts and the inner solar system from the moon and so on and so forth. You know better than myself what capabilities control of the moon brings to the table. So,
well, I mean, there's no question that the Chinese are looking at the moon as a strategic point, and using it, so already deploying. Just to step back a little bit, balance of power, and going back to Thucydides and more modern areas of Ken Waltz, et cetera, you can explain a lot of things in history over time by balancing of power, whether intentional or whether natural or sort of in some sort of an oligarchic way of trying to do it. It seems like a natural way of interaction of states when you're in what we call in politics a state of anarchy. And the problem for many states is you want to have a balance in your favor would be greatest, and a balance. If not, you have to make alliances. And the best balance is the one that you grow yourself through industry or through growth or power. But it's almost always thought of as a defensive thing and not an offensive thing. And this is where the hegemon is so powerful through history is when there is a hegemon, and this is really social collective action theory, when there is one actor who is clearly more powerful than others, whose actions can be used to most effectively influence the balance. Those are the longest periods of peace in the system. There may be a lot of small wars, but the great wars don't break out. It's commerce expands because the hegemon takes on the costs of protecting commerce because they have the most benefit from global commerce, from and I'm talking about global hegemony here. And it's also been quite noticeable by neo-Marxist philosophers like Immanuel Wallerstein, who does a fascinating discussion of hegemony. And his conclusion is the only real hegemons have to be the leading liberal republic of the day, because the hegemon has enough power to influence events everywhere, that every other actor in the system has to be concerned about what the hegemon will do in response to their actions as they plan them. But if you have enough power that you can get an empire instead of a hegemony, if you can actually create complete control, the idea there is that's a scary thing because you'll try it. And so there's always balances to the hegemon as well. And you see that with even as much as we in the United States think we're the good guys and we're doing things for the benefit of others, it's very difficult from the other position to see how beneficial it is for them. It seems it's difficult. But these periods have been historically the most peaceful, whether it was the Dutch in the 17th century or the British in the 18th century or the United States after World War II. The big wars don't seem to break out, and we have names for those, but it's a small n and it's hard to tell. But that balancing goes on constantly, and from the balancing, then we get these efforts, and going all the way back to Thucydides, the most dangerous time is when a hegemon has been in existence for a while, and arguably the United States has had its ups and downs, but since World War II has been the hegemon in the world system. When there is a rising power coming up that threatens to overthrow that is the most dangerous time, because of not because of the rise in power of the other, but because of the fear that causes in the existing hegemon. And the United States right now is really, really concerned. The military is extraordinarily concerned with the rise of Chinese power. And the Chinese are simply doing what seems to be natural in a balancing world. But what they're doing on the moon is just brilliant from any objective standpoint, whether you favor one side or the other in these sort of things. They've established at the L2 Lagrange point, which is one of those 5 points in the orbit of any two bodies that gravity cancels out, for lack of a better term. In other words, they're stable positions, one between the Earth and the Moon, one on the other side of the Moon, one on the backside of the Earth relative to the Moon, and then 2, L4 and L5, in the orbits of the Moon around the Earth. There's Lagrange positions for the Earth around the Sun, for the moons of Mars around Mars, etc. They exist, but the ones that are really useful for us are these here in our own cislunar space. one of the problems we've had with the moon and understanding the moon is one side is always away from the Earth because it rotates in its monthly cycle in such a way that we get to see the waning and waxing of the light on the moon, but the same side is always with us. The far side we cannot see, we cannot communicate with, because directed energy radio waves I have to have a line of sight or a relay transmission. The Chinese have placed a satellite at the L2 point, which is on the far side of the moon. And what they're really doing is orbiting around that. It's a very stable orbit, and the orbit is large enough that from the perspective of the Earth, it can be seen wherever it is in its orbit around the moon. So they have constant 24-hour access to the far side of the moon, as far as if they put something there for communications, or if they have something there that is trying to get surveillance of it, or if there will be people that go there, or any other type of thing. The first place they're planning to build, and they have recently announced, I don't know how far it will go, but a realignment with Russia as the third sort of great space power, probably being vied with by India right now, but they are putting a base, their first base, they've made it known, will be on the South Pole. And the South Pole, you think, well, of course, there may be substantial amounts of ice in the craters there that could be used as rocket fuel for traveling. Very useful fuel. But the real thing is, it's got high ground there, and so from a position on the high ground at the South Pole, you actually get sunlight 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. It's always got sunlight, and that means you always have solar power. You don't need batteries to sustain you, as you do for half of the month when you would be in the dark at any other point, in the shadow of the sun at any point. So it's a brilliant location geopolitically. This is a really, really good location, as well as the relay site. Now they're looking at making a moon base as something in the control, as you've spoken of maybe a command center, as a launch point. It takes, if you build something on the moon and want to launch it out somewhere else, it has 22 times less gravity. It's 22 times more efficient to send something up. So if you are looking to control the cislunar lines of communication, there may be no better place than the one they picked. And in retrospect, we all look at it and go, gosh, that was a good idea. Why didn't we have that first? And in law, the policy is you cannot own or claim any place that is on a body, but you get rights that no one can interfere with what you're legitimately doing. And so if someone were to try to put a base right next to them or something, they could say, well, we're doing scientific experiments here. You're interfering with what I'm trying to do. You're messing up my vision, my experiments. And so you have to go farther away. Essentially, they've staked that spot out. And if they get there first, and there's no reason to think that they won't, they seem to be on target with their lunar programs, very much on target. They're going to have a really, really interesting high ground position within the cislunar geography.
Yeah, and you know, in that vein, it's very interesting that you mentioned the Wallerstein concept of this division of labor on Earth, and you know, those peripheria and centers, and it's also very interesting his contradiction between the liberal hegemon of the world ocean and the probably Eurasian empire that is controlling every sinews of economy. But you know, everything is underpinned by strategic flows. That, you know, our division of labor, because people move, trade moves, cargo moves, goods move, you know, data, with knowledge, wisdom, information. And if we also you know, start to understand that in space it will be the same. It will be all about strategic flows from Earth to Earth orbits, refilling, fuel depot, then moon, lines of communication, both data or Hoffman transfers in terms of real transportation. It creates a whole connectivity, a complicated connectivity of the cislunar and who will be in charge of this integrated network of connectivity and will control the pivotal points, both on Earth that are determining the best paths to space and within space, and then in space itself, that will be the manifestation of the space power, right? And I hope that the guys in the US Space Force are really pondering where those places are and how to control them, given all those, problems, barriers, and so on, because it is happening, and who will be first could deny the access to the other guy, to the other competitor, be it on the moon or this integrated cislunar. I was even wondering, I really am curious what you think about this, space lift or orbital ring, all those infrastructure ideas that can make the space travel cheaper, launching us or robots or systems from Earth to space cheaply, and making really space economy launch, infrastructure launch within the cislunar. What is your take on that?
Well, unless we come up with some sort of anti-gravity propellant, it's always going to be expensive to get to space. The tactic that the commercial space barons, as we call them, the tremendously rich folks who are trying to stake out space with a lot of their own money, though, they're getting guaranteed contracts too. In order to, there is some subsidizing of that looks a little bit hidden. But the best way to lower the cost of access to space is an economy of scale. Having lots and lots and lots of rockets built rather than built exquisitely, each mission just so and changes to everything, but actually having production line of spacecraft and rockets, and then getting them launched. The first automobiles were extraordinarily expensive, handcrafted, one-of-a-kind things. But when you get the assembly line, standardization of parts, and you start bringing down the price, the Model T of Ford is amazing. When you look at it when it came out, say 1910 to 1914, the price of a car was the equivalent of 2 years' salary of the average worker in America, a little more than that, actually. It was a nice thing to have. It was really wonderful. But by 1920, just a few years later, and of course, World War I accelerated a lot of this, but the average American could afford a car with about a quarter of a year of the salary. And suddenly you've got an economy of scale that's growing and getting cheaper and cheaper all the time. Relative, it's still where you are. Where the per capita income is under $1,000 a year, it's still pretty hard to get a car, at least a new one. So doing this, I think economy of scale of relentless action in space, because it is infrastructure. GPS alone, the global positioning satellite system, and now the Chinese have their Beidou system, the Galileo of Europe, the Russians have a system, and others are bringing that. And that actually is good for it. It's not good when the United States has a monopoly on it or anyone else, because they can work together, they can merge together and get really, really good, precise and redundant capabilities. But that system alone, which was fielded by the United States Air Force, was first conceived of in the 1960s, but because it's pretty hard to say, well, why do I need, something that tells me where I am on a road? I've got a map. Why would I spend thousands of dollars to have that? And so it doesn't get fielded really until the 1980s. And even then it's woefully behind its schedule. But once you start getting business folks looking at what they can do with that, and you start building applications, when you start realizing that the exquisite timing signal that they have can be used to create a real-time encryption at tremendous capabilities. The only reason the internet works is because of GPS. We had a recent scare in this country where part of our power grid looked like it had been hijacked by hackers and for ransom. The power grid will go down without GPS controlling the movement and flow of the electricity, partly because it's so antiquated. Banking requires it to make electronic transactions, secure. You don't buy something on Walmart and worry about whether your credit card is going to end up, not really, in the hands of someone else, because those transactions are encrypted, and that's all through GPS. It's estimated that, and this was several years ago, that $22 trillion a day is transferred in banking institutions around the world, financial institutions. And that all happens because we have GPS. And the US Air Force built it, sustains it, continues to maintain it. It's part of its budget. And frankly, it is now a global public good. We can't turn it off. It would just devastate global economies. So space becomes infrastructure. And when we start looking at threats to space, we say, well, if someone wants to do something dastardly to the world, much less to any individual country, if they could make space capabilities, take them down, make space difficult to travel through, et cetera, it would be absolutely devastating. So from a military point of view, we're looking at deterring that activity. There's a lot of problems with deterring an activity that's based on having the activity, and somebody's taking out an activity that you can't respond to if you don't have that activity. And we have to be able to defend. What happens when deterrence fails? We have to be able to defend and protect things. And to do that, we have to be in close proximity, or at least reach in time to be able to defend those things. So that's where the focus is going on in that. If I can just roll back, though, to a second, because you had mentioned the interplay on the hegemonic powers, that it seems to Wallerstein, and who does his peripheries and core and semi-peripheries, looks very much like Mackinder and Spickman's rimlands and outer crescents, et cetera, and heartlands, just different, an economic model rather than a strategic military model. But that idea that land powers tend to become empires because the land power itself, the domain of land, is based on taking and holding territories, having troops that can put boots on the ground, that can take territory. So states that have to defend themselves from being surrounded by land powers tend to be have more control, be more likely to move into an empire, because it creates a zone or a buffer of security for them. So they expand out for their own security. Whereas seafaring states, which tended to be based their power in trade, the movement of goods, and then you get an associated Navy capability with that, they have very little capability historically to influence events directly on the land. In other words, you cannot take and hold territory except for ports and the very peripherals of territory from the sea. It's a power projection issue. Today we have air power, which can reach out and touch any place on the earth or on the oceans, but it cannot command those spaces. It cannot control them. All it can do is prevent access by others. The example I use quite often is let's say there's a ship that we suspect of human trafficking out on the oceans. Well, we can send an aircraft. The Air Force could send out a plane and sink it. But unless you can board that craft, get on it, rescue anyone first of all, if there is victims of human trafficking, get them off the boat, rescue them, round up the people who have that boat, take that boat maybe and use it as a prize if it's a good one. Unless you can do that, you can't control the sea lanes. You have to be on the sea lanes to be able to control them. You have to. What you can do is deny someone else access to it, as in sinking the ship. But you can't use it. You can't fish from the air. You can't extract resources from the seabeds there. You can't use it. So it's the same thing with the air. We talk about air power as a warfighting domain, and we think that we mistake the effect we get as air power. We'll say, well, if you bomb a factory, that's economic power. No, that's an economic effect of being able to get an aircraft in the air. If you can't operate in the air, you can't do anything from the air. It sounds overly simplistic, but if you bomb a school, we don't call that educational warfare. It may have an educational effect, to be sure, but it's air power, it's bombing. Um, you can prevent air power from flying over the top of you with very sophisticated SAMs, surface-to-air missiles, or other air defenses. In fact, our U.S. Army says they'll shoot down anything that flies above it. And even if that's true, that does not give us command of the air. It just means that the enemy can't use it. But the enemy may be able to do the same thing to prevent us from using it. In other words, nobody can use the air. To use space effectively, to get effects from space, to get the advantages from space that you want, you have to be able to operate space. And to operate space, you have to be able to defend it. You have to be able to get there, and you have to be able to stay there. And that's from a warfighting perspective. When we talk about a warfighting domain, the U.S. Space Force or the Air Force, that's what we mean. It doesn't mean we want to go there and fight. It means that we have to have the ability to fight our way into the domain if necessary, so that we can stay there and project effects from that. And those will be economic, those will be communications capabilities, getting transmissions of data, internet, et cetera, to peoples around the world, maybe transmitting solar power to peoples around the world through microwave capabilities, through directed energy capabilities, but also to support our ability to operate on the ground and to provide effects. So when we talk about warfighting domain and the importance of it, it's not just some warmongering, desire to have, a navy in the space because it's cool, there's guns or whatever. It's to be able to provide the necessary effects, whether it's commerce, economics, support to warfighting capability, or even contesting. And so from space, as we've talked about a lot, you get that high ground capability to reach out and touch anywhere on the earth where we live, where our factories are, where our economic, where our lives are, wherever the things we value internally are. But it's not to create a war. It's still with the idea that this is how we prevent damage that would be so great that it would ruin, it would collapse the world economies and collapse our livelihood. Sorry, I went on with that.
No, that's if I may, if you permit me to add a few things. I was thinking about the strength, the importance, the influence of the air power and the space power, and I think that the air power is highly exaggerated. Its importance in terms. It's compared to space, it's only a hopping proposition, because you take a pilot, he flies like 3 hours, gets back to base, has a hot meal, and gets a debrief, right? And it's not it doesn't loiter. It doesn't last long in the air. It's a hopping proposition, highly dependent upon the land airstrips, land-based airstrips, or sea-based airstrips, being aircraft carriers. So this capability within the air domain is highly dependent, hinged even upon other domains. It is also commanded. The chain of command is very strict in the air operations. They are not independent. It's not like with the Navy that sail there, loiter for 6 months, and find a Japanese merchant ship, right? In whatever manner you wish, just be effective, right? That's the proposition. The Navy operates often without communication lines because they might be interrupted, or whatever, and they mass for a battle or something. So it's a completely different thing. And air, as you properly said, didn't control, and is not an ultimate proposition to impose on domains at the end of the day. The Afghanistan war proved that I think space is a real game changer, because if we really have all the necessary breakthroughs in technology, space, both imposing on Earth from the higher ground, can really be the ultimate domain because of the sensors, transparency that that space gives, the speeds, because in space you're both global and local. You can be a global power and also have a local imposition of your will because of the cosmic speeds involved. And also, if we really have a real space-based economy of the celestial bodies, then as opposed to the world ocean, where Mongolia is not vulnerable to the sea power projection, everybody on all celestial bodies will be surrounded by the space ocean, highly dependent upon the space lines of communication and the space force that is dominant in the area. It's a different proposition, so it's a really ultimate domain. Of course, we don't have this breadth yet because of the lack of technology and lack of imagination. But once certain breakthroughs are achieved, this will be a different story. And as you know, as we all know, space systems loiter; they move costless. I mean, if they don't maneuver, of course, it doesn't pay money. It doesn't cost money, and they may stay for. How long did the last X-37B flight take? Like 6 months?
Well, I think over 2 years now.
2 years. Okay.
Yeah.
We don't even know how many pieces of this space plane exist, right? It's a difference. And F-35s is just takes off in 3 hours and is back. Hopping to position, as I said. Different story. So I've been thinking. By the way, what decision was made by U.S. Space Force? Navy ranks or Air Force ranks?
Oh gosh, it's Air Force ranks right now. There was a lot of pressure from a lot of people who a lot of the folks who are if you're interested in space, you were probably inspired by science fiction, and every technological development we've had in space was presaged by sci-fi. But that's, by the way, space sci-fi is having a renaissance in China, and really interesting, good theater and good literature coming out of that. But that's also indicative of a really space mad society. The taikonauts are rock stars.
Everett, if you don't mind, let me interrupt. I'm sorry for interrupting. Yeah. For the purpose of the book that we wrote, we hired a Chinese Mandarin speaker living in the West to sort of dive into the Chinese internet, okay, into all those social media, which are abandoned. And it was a woman. She told us that it's an ocean of discussions, of knowledge, it's a vast reservoir of knowledge and interest. I was shocked. The subjects raised there are shocking.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna have to push back a little bit on what you said about the Air Force being overblown. Just because they signed my paycheck, but there was a time when the air was unquestionably the new high ground, and technologically capabilities have changed. That goes out for 3 hours, it comes back and have dinners. Yeah, it's true. We haven't had a plane lost in combat since in Vietnam. We've had a few shot down and a couple accidentally by ourselves, and training accidents happen and other accidents and malfunctions. But the United States Air Force has been pretty dominant in the air as far as air-to-air combat. But it can't control the ground. It can simply contest it. And space, by the way, can contest the ground, the air, and the sea, as you pointed out. But it can't control them. And so I think a lot of fear that sometimes comes up about commanding space and controlling the world, even though I use that dictum to make the analogy with Mackinder in Eastern Europe and the Heartland, it's more of an influence, a real influence. But technologically, Air Force did have its day, and it's still, right now, we are the bulk of any violence that a war fight would have for the United States, because we feel we have to project power across the oceans rather than absorb it on our own land. And that's an attitude that's been there for a while. and air power is a critical part of that. But it is difficult. If we think someone's going to launch a nuclear weapon, let's say North Korea, we can send up the F-35s to fly figure eights for a few hours and then get replaced by another one for a few hours, ready to shoot that down, because you'd have to be pretty close and get it in the boost phase to stop that, to defend from that. And pretty quickly we run out of F-35s. They get worn down. They're all these modern technology things have tremendous repair rates and maintenance rates, and they're expensive. All North Korea has to do is look like they're going to launch and then stop, and then look like they're going to launch and stop. Happens in Afghanistan. You put a kid with an old rifle on a hill and have him shoot a few pot shots at a base, and you mobilize everything. You get the helicopters up, you get the aircraft up. The kid goes off into the woods, and that's that. And then you do it again, and you do it again. And pretty soon you get worn out. Space is going to be a lot different because it has that loitering effect. And as you pointed out with submarines and in the old days, before radio communications, of course, a Navy admiral would be essentially a viceroy, would go out and had the ability to make treaties, had to have complete control over what was going on at the time. And we can see that being a more appropriate model than an up and down. I mean, when we think of space control or space in these strategic terms of the geography, we're not talking about just going up and down for a suborbital ride constantly, as we're getting with economics. We're talking about having bases and being there and having things that stay forever. One of the sort of interesting developments that happened over the last year or two is, as you say, loitering. And with the X-37B, it's up there, and we forget it's up there. And it's doing its experiments, and it's testing long-term duration in outer space. But the Russians have recently had a number of satellites that we thought were dead for years that all of a sudden activate, start maneuvering around, and then they look like they're dead again. I don't know what that's about, but it's strange. We really don't have the ability, unless we have awareness and unless we have sensors in space to do this. Really, if anything's even still alive up there and when it might be used for, and it can be turned off and stay there for a long time. It'll eventually get degraded, but it's got that loiter capability. And so most of us who are real champions of space power I think that a sort of a Navy rank structure would be better, because it would give us more of an attitude of sort of the glory days of the Navy, rather than and also separate out a little bit from the idea of air power. But those who have who see the air power as the real king of battles still wanted to have an attitude that is more air and space based rather than space and air based. And so the fight goes on, although I just saw today there were a couple of folks who came out in Congress and said, this whole Navy rank thing, we got to go look back at that, because it's a culture you're trying to build and an attitude on that. But with air power, now that I push back a little bit, air power, we really have a basing problem with it. We still talk about A2AD, air denial. Can we actually get strike aircraft deep into China, deep into Russia, deep into any country that might have sophisticated defenses? And we're going to get there and have a few minutes time to actually do something. We fly long duration missions, but we have to have tanker support for that, because all of our missions go so far. We've got to refuel them on the way in and on the way out, and it's tremendously expensive. It is tremendously expensive to do that kind of thing and to continue to sustain it. But the bulk cost for space is getting it up there, and then once it's up there, it's cheap. So there's real space. Space will be the clear high ground in the future, and I think we're going to start thinking of air as the Coast Guard of space when we talk of the Coast Guard of the Space Force. And I know that pisses off a lot of my Air Force pals, but the Coast Guard is actually arguably more important to us now than our Navy, and that will also anger our Navy forces. They do day-to-day business and missions that are critical to the security of the United States. And The other thing is they have police authority that the Navy doesn't have, or lawmaking authority within those zones that we control. And that's always been the big thing about common areas out at sea and out in all of space. If we don't want to exert force, if we don't have to, but if we have to exert force, if we have to use force, and we can see some missions of the U.S. Space Force in the future, there'll be search and rescue. Who's going to do that kind of thing? And that would be maybe a manned mission. Who's going to do the observation? We're looking really heavily at space traffic management as more and more satellites and more debris and more natural threats come in. We've got to be able to see those. We've got to be able to mitigate those. We've got to start taking debris out of space. If we can remove debris from space, we can remove a satellite. We have an effective weapon, even though that wouldn't be the intent of what it's put up. It could be used for that. So there's lots and lots of things that a military is going to do to protect commerce. But it's also in the international system we have today. It is the only legitimate purveyor of force that we can use in a non-sovereign area. And in war, of course, in an enemy sovereign area. But in peacetime, it's the only legitimate purveyor of force. It's the Navy that goes out and unblocks sea lanes, that goes after pirates. And we do have piracy in space. It's electronic right now, but who knows what it will be as we get resources. So it's those hegemons of the past. It's the British Navy that eventually and finally decided that trafficking in human slavery would stop, and went around and policed that. Now, other states might have said, hey, you have no right to do that, but they certainly had no right to send a constabulary out there. Police force is domestic, military force is external, and those are the only legitimate uses that the state claims a monopoly on it and is recognized as legal in the international system. So we're going to have to do some police stuff. We might have to get some Coast Guard capabilities recognized and in treaty around the world to do that. But the mission of the military is not to win wars. Otherwise, anytime we're not actively engaged in wars and winning them, there's no use for us. The mission of the military is to be prepared, and when called upon by the legitimate governing authority to maximize violence within the constraints placed upon it by that authority. That means you train, you maintain capabilities, you do research and development, and you keep at least a cadre standing military in times of peace, so that you don't. It's the old Roman adage, "Sic pacem para bellum." If you want peace, prepare for war. And that's the logic.
Yeah, Everett, before we end this conversation, I mean, let me, give a few arguments to advocate really for the space domain as opposed to
Please do. Yeah.
It's, you mentioned anti-exterior denial capability, and the Air Force is, having problems with penetrating, the strategic bombers cannot be escorted anymore by fighters in Eurasia, all those problems, and, integrate air defense and so on. But vertical flanking that space is providing is a complete bypass of that, both in terms of course, reconnaissance and everything related to situational awareness, which is already happening. So we have a vertical flanking. If you add to that this hypersonic, cruise hypersonic, which will be guided by space sensors and systems, but it will be within the atmosphere. It's a complete game changer within the new paradigm of the warfare, terrestrial warfare, where mass is a headache. Mm-hmm. Dispersal is the answer. And global distances and tactical outcomes enabled by space-based infrastructure in hypersonic, and maybe even later by some lasers or some other systems directly from space. And this will create the vertical flanking, and this will enable US to revert this unfavorable position of the overextended lines of communication on Earth, right? Where the US is a great power coming from across the oceans, along the extended lines of communications, against vis-a-vis the internal lines of communication of the continental powers. So space is a complete annihilator of that because it's so close, right? And if
you won't get an argument from me on that. I mean, that is absolutely correct. If we have the ability to project force from space.
And also with the Starship, for example, you can transport troops, even cargo. Its payload will be bigger than a C-70's Galaxy, and I've heard that U.S. Space Force has started talks to SpaceX, right, about this. So,
and that's where you need the true space plane, though, because with the, I mean, we can deliver them in theory, but how do we get them back out?
True. Of course, that's obvious. But as a sort of talking about the future, where space theoretically is a really ultimate domain that can provide everything.
Well, and there's, I mean, we have the analogy too. I mean, because the air power, when it came out and as it developed and it matured, you see all the strategy saying that the key to air power is it creates a third dimension to warfare. It can skip over those fielded forces, those lines of forces, which creates the dispersion, which is actually absolutely correct. But when you get the global view from outer space, the global view, it's still literally a two-dimensional. It's just the planes are a little tiny bit higher and going a little bit faster, but they're still going along the arc of the Earth. Now you've got something above all that, and it just completely flanks it at all times. It just completely flanks. Another advantage, which I've always thought was in the ideas of missile defense from space, but when you talk about hypersonic defense, and this is the real thing that keeps a lot of our strategists up at night, is these hypersonics. They're really worried about these at night. From space, you can detect them very quickly. The heat signatures are going to be just as easy to detect as any missile, any cruise missile, but you can detect them from the launch site, and you can destroy it before it gets out of country, in theory, before it gets out of their territory, which means any damage or detritus that comes from that, you don't have to wait till it's incoming to your own territory to try to engage it with a terrestrial defense, which is going to be very spotty. You'd have to have SAMs everywhere to defend from those, rather than because by the time you detect them and can actually get the projectile there to, or even the laser from a line of sight position to it, it's not that far away. It's very close. So missing is you get a lot of shots at it on its travel path, in theory, from space. You get one shot from the ground trying to do it, and if you miss, you're in a lot of trouble. And even if you hit it, the biggest loss of life we had in Desert Storm was when a Patriot missile engaged a Scud, hit it, knocked it off course, and the rocket body slammed into a Marines barracks. The detritus and damage, I mean, that was seared into my mind. I was involved in some operations at that time. The damage that just made me just turned me right off that path and into the path of space-based defenses, not just against missiles, but against fast-moving aircraft, and certainly now hypersonics. That's keeping up all the planners at night awake.
Yeah, and the only the optimal solution to that is speed of light weapons, right? That kills the threat upon launching, almost, right? So that brings us back to space again. So.
It does. It seems like everything brings us back to space now.
Especially if we talk about it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay, I think it's as everybody can hear, we could talk longer, but it's we need to stick to what we had agreed upon before. So let's end now. Thank you, Everett. That was really great, and thank you all from our audience and watching audience. We talked about space warfare, space economy, domains, strategy, you name it. Everything that we love so much. And our special guest was Everett Dolman, a great strategist of space, professor teaching the next generations of U.S. Space Force commanders and aviators in U.S. and elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you.